One factory, one assembly line, one corridor in Russian airspace nobody thought to guard. The Alabuga Special Economic Zone sits deep in Tatarstan, roughly 1,400 kilometers from the nearest front line. By every conventional military measure, it was untouchable. Russian air defense planners trusted distance as their shield. Plant administrators tracked production schedules and nothing else. Iranian engineers inside the facility believed they were working in the safest industrial complex in the Russian Federation. They were all wrong. This is the story of how Ukrainian Storm Shadow cruise missiles traveled 1,400 kilometers through Russian airspace, threaded a gap between two separate air defense districts, and gutted the most important drone manufacturing facility in Russia's war machine. This is the story of the Alabuga strike, and this is EastAlert. I'm your host at EastAlert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Tonight, we're breaking down a long-range precision strike that didn't just destroy buildings. It attacked Russia's industrial confidence. It attacked the assumption that depth equals safety. And it showed something Moscow's military planners are still struggling to process. Modern warfare has no sanctuary. Let's start with what Alabuga actually is, because the scale of this target matters. The Alabuga Special Economic Zone is a controlled industrial park in the Republic of Tatarstan, roughly 900 kilometers east of Moscow. It covers nearly 40 square kilometers of purpose-built manufacturing infrastructure, with tax incentives, restricted access, and federal investment that made it one of the most significant industrial projects in post-Soviet Russia. The zone hosts dozens of enterprises, but the facility that matters for this story is the one that doesn't appear on any public commercial registry. Deep inside Alabuga's northeastern industrial cluster, Russia set up a licensed production arrangement with Iranian defense contractors to manufacture what Moscow officially calls the Geran 2 loitering munition. In Iranian nomenclature, it's the Shahed 136. In Ukrainian targeting lists, it has a far simpler designation: the weapon that has been shutting off Ukrainian electricity for over 3 years. The Shahed 136 is not a sophisticated weapon by Western standards. Its airframe is a delta-wing design roughly 2.5 meters long. It runs on a small piston engine with modest thrust. It navigates via a pre-programmed GPS-assisted route, making it relatively easy to jam or intercept individually. But Russia doesn't use it individually. Russia uses it in swarms. Hundreds of them, launched in coordinated waves designed to overwhelm Ukrainian air defense by volume alone, forcing defenders to burn expensive interceptor missiles against cheap one-way attackers. The arithmetic of attrition is what makes the Shahed strategically significant. A single Geran 2 costs Russia roughly $20,000 to produce at Alabuga's licensed facility. A Ukrainian Patriot interceptor missile costs somewhere between $3 and $4 million. When Russia launches 100 drones in a single night and Ukraine intercepts 60 of them, Russia has spent $2 million to drain $6 to $12 million from Ukrainian air defense stocks. This is not an accident. It is doctrine. Alabuga is the engine driving that doctrine. Ukrainian intelligence analysts, cross-referencing satellite imagery with commercial shipping data and OSINT reports from Telegram monitoring channels, estimated the facility was producing between 300 and 500 Geran 2 units per month at peak capacity. Some Ukrainian general staff assessments pushed that figure higher. Every drone that rolled off that line represented another potential blackout somewhere in Ukraine. A hospital running on generators, a heating system going cold in winter, a family watching their power grid fail on a phone screen. Destroying that line was not merely a military objective. It was a humanitarian calculation. Which weapon was deadlier against a hardened production facility at this range? A. HIMARS B, Storm Shadow C, ballistic missile? Comment your analysis below. The targeting process for Alabuga did not begin in a single planning session. It evolved over months of intelligence work that Ukrainian special services have acknowledged in general terms without releasing operational specifics. What Ukrainian sources and independent OSINT investigators have pieced together describes extraordinary patience and methodical preparation. Ukrainian military intelligence, known by its Ukrainian abbreviation HER, built the Alabuga target package through multiple converging intelligence streams. Commercial satellite operators, including companies whose imagery feeds are monitored by Ukrainian government agencies and volunteer OSINT networks, had been imaging the Alabuga zone at regular intervals. Analysis over time revealed patterns. Truck traffic entering specific compounds on cyclical schedules, distinctive exhaust signatures from manufacturing ventilation systems, and the expansion of a particular building cluster in the northeastern section that did not match any publicly announced commercial project. Signals intelligence added another layer. Intercepted logistics communications, parsed by Ukrainian analysts alongside partner nation intelligence services, revealed supply chains connecting Iranian aerospace component manufacturers to Alabuga-bound freight handlers, Iranian technicians traveling on commercial flights to regional Russian airports. Component shipments moving through intermediary transit points designed to obscure their origin. The picture that emerged was of a facility operating with complete confidence. Alabuga's plant management was not taking elaborate concealment measures. Why would they? They were 1,400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, inside Russia, untouchable by every conventional measure. Stay with me, because what unfolds in the next section dismantles that assumption piece by piece, and the moment the first missile crossed the Russian border, everything the plant's management thought they knew became irrelevant. The penetration corridor is where the operation's tactical ingenuity lives. Storm Shadow, known in French service as SCALP-EG, is a joint British-French cruise missile system Ukraine received in stages following extended diplomatic negotiations with London and Paris. The missile is approximately 5 meters long, subsonic, with a range officially stated at over 250 kilometers, but assessed by multiple open-source analysts as capable of significantly longer flight profiles under optimized launch conditions. It carries a dual-stage BROACH warhead designed to defeat hardened structures. A penetrating precursor charge blasts through reinforced concrete, followed by a larger blast fragmentation warhead detonating inside the structure. At export-restricted range parameters, Storm Shadow cannot reach Tatarstan from Ukrainian-controlled territory on a direct flight path. This is not a secret. Russian air defense planners built their coverage assumptions around this constraint. The S-400 systems defending Moscow's outer ring, the S-300 batteries covering the Volga corridor, the radar networks guarding Western approaches were all calibrated to the assumption that Western-supplied cruise missiles had a ceiling on their geographic reach. Ukrainian engineers and their Western partners spent months working around that ceiling. The solution involved a modified Su-24M Fencer, Ukraine's aging but capable supersonic strike aircraft, carrying a Storm Shadow pylon adapter. The aircraft doesn't launch from Ukrainian territory and fly home. It penetrates Russian airspace at extremely low altitude, using terrain masking along a pre-calculated flight path that exploits the geometric dead zones between two overlapping Russian air defense districts, the coverage boundary between the Moscow Military District's southern radar fence and the Volga-Ural District's western radar fence. That seam, that gap created by two bureaucratically separate air defense commands with slightly misaligned radar handoff protocols, that is where the Su-24M flew. How many Geran 2 drones was the Alabuga facility capable of producing monthly? A 150B, 300 to 500C, 800? Answer revealed at the end of this video. The crew of the modified Su-24M flew at an altitude that terrain masking calculations had determined would keep them below the detection threshold of the relevant Russian radar arrays for the critical penetration phase. Low enough that the aircraft's radar cross-section merged with ground clutter returns. Low enough that the flight crew was trusting navigation systems and pre-planned routing over anything their eyes could tell them in the dark. The risk was not abstract. A single tracking radar locking on at the wrong moment, a roving patrol aircraft they hadn't anticipated, a weather deviation forcing them above their designated altitude band. Any of these would have ended the mission and the crew. The radar geometry was not the only problem. Weather conditions in the Tatarstan region at the time of the operation created an additional complication that mission planners had to account for in the final hours before launch authorization. A frontal system moving through the Volga Basin was generating low cloud ceilings that affected Storm Shadow's terminal guidance reliability. The missile uses an infrared imaging seeker in its terminal phase to match a stored image of the target against what its sensor actually sees. Cloud cover below a certain altitude threshold creates imaging problems. Ukrainian mission planners adjusted the attack profile, modifying the terminal dive angle to bring the missile through the cloud layer at a steeper trajectory, reducing the infrared imaging window but preserving enough sensor clarity for target discrimination. The adjustment worked. Post-strike satellite imagery analysis published by multiple open-source monitoring organizations showed the missiles impacted with high precision on the northeastern manufacturing cluster. Subscribe to EastAlert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what happened in those final seconds before impact is a masterclass in precision targeting. The launch window opened. The Su-24M crew, operating under complete communication silence, flew their penetration profile without deviation. At the calculated release point, the Storm Shadow missiles left the aircraft's pylons, their onboard navigation systems activated, and the aircraft turned back toward Ukrainian-controlled airspace at maximum speed. From that moment, the missiles were autonomous. Each Storm Shadow flew its pre-programmed route at terrain-following altitude through the remaining penetration corridor, making course adjustments based on onboard terrain referencing navigation that compares radar altimeter data against stored digital elevation maps. They were not following a signal from any external transmitter. They could not be jammed in the conventional sense. They were, in the most literal technical meaning of the phrase, on their own. The Alabuga facility's security on a normal operational night consisted of a perimeter fence with guards, a roving vehicle patrol on a predictable schedule, and a small radar installation feeding into the broader regional air defense network. That radar was looking outward, calibrated for threats coming from the west, from Ukrainian-held territory, across the conventional threat corridor. The Storm Shadows arrived from a direction the radar's azimuth coverage did not prioritize. The first indication the facility's security staff had of an incoming threat was not from their radar. It was from the acoustic signature of the missile's Williams International turbofan engines as the weapons transitioned from terrain-following mode to their terminal attack profile, climbing sharply to gain the altitude the BROACH warhead's penetration sequence needed to function correctly. The climb takes seconds. The entire terminal phase, from the initial altitude gain to warhead detonation, unfolds in under 30 seconds. The plant administrators, the Iranian technicians, the Russian factory workers, the shift supervisors, none of them had 30 seconds of useful warning time. Some accounts from intercepted communications, assessed by Ukrainian intelligence as authentic and later referenced in Ukrainian general staff briefings, describe plant security personnel transmitting fragmented alert traffic in the seconds before impact. The transmissions are urgent. They are also too late. The first warhead impacted the primary assembly hall in the northeastern manufacturing cluster. The BROACH penetrating charge punched through the reinforced roof section, the precursor detonating at a depth calculated to breach the structural concrete before the main charge fired. The blast propagated through the assembly hall, destroying manufacturing equipment, igniting stored materials, and causing immediate structural collapse in the affected bay. The second missile impacted seconds later on an adjacent building assessed by Ukrainian targeting analysts as a components storage facility, based on satellite imagery showing consistent inbound truck traffic and controlled access entry protocols. The detonation inside the storage structure triggered secondary fires as the materials inside, assessed by multiple analysts as drone airframe components and propellant materials, caught and burned. If you believe tactics fundamentally reshape industrial warfare, type EastAlert in the comments. The secondary fires matter for a specific reason. They lasted a long time. Post-strike satellite imagery captured by commercial operators and disseminated through open-source monitoring networks showed thermal signatures consistent with sustained industrial fires burning inside the compromised structures for many hours after the initial strikes. This is not what happens when you bomb an empty warehouse. This is what happens when you hit a facility that was actively manufacturing and storing materials. The structural collapse was the detail the Iranian engineering personnel on site did not anticipate. The Northeastern Assembly Hall, based on assessments derived from pre-strike satellite imagery and building permit records obtained through OSINT research, was a large-span industrial structure built to house manufacturing equipment and production lines. When the BROACH warhead detonated at depth, the blast propagated vertically as well as horizontally, transferring force into the structural columns supporting the roof. The roof came down. Post-strike accounts referenced in Ukrainian military and independent analyst reports indicated that Iranian technicians were working inside the assembly hall at the time of the strike. The shift schedules, derived from monitored vehicle movement patterns, placed a significant technical team inside the building during the attack window. Post-strike intercepted communications, assessed as authentic by Ukrainian intelligence services, describe chaotic evacuation attempts and injuries consistent with structural collapse and blast trauma. Ukrainian General Staff reports framed the outcome in measured terms: confirmed strikes on the Alabuga manufacturing cluster, secondary fires observed, production capability assessed as significantly degraded. Independent OSINT analysis was less restrained. Multiple open-source researchers cross-referencing satellite imagery, intercepted supply chain communications, and signals from known Alabuga-related freight forwarding networks concluded that the Northeastern Assembly Complex was effectively destroyed. The production line was down. Now let's assess what that actually means for the war. Alabuga at peak capacity was producing between 300 and 500 Geran 2 drones per month. At $20,000 per unit, that's $6 to $10 million of weapons production flowing to the front every month. More importantly, it's 300 to 500 weapons that would be launched at Ukrainian infrastructure, each requiring an interceptor missile costing orders of magnitude more to defeat. Every day the Alabuga line was down was a day Ukraine's air defense stocks were not being drained. Every week of lost production was potentially hundreds of Ukrainian civilians who kept their electricity. The mathematics of industrial warfare are cold, but they are clear. Russian military logistics networks, monitored by Ukrainian intelligence and partner nation signals assets, showed disruption in the Geron 2 supply pipeline in the weeks following the strike. Operational sortie rates for Shahed attacks against Ukrainian infrastructure showed measurable variation in the period after the strike compared to the preceding operational tempo. The disruption was not permanent. Russia has redundant production capacity and Iranian supply partners. But it was real, and it was consequential. What would NATO's air defense planners have done differently to protect a strategic facility at this depth? Comment your analysis below. The deeper lesson of the Alabuga strike is not the damage to a single facility. It is the principle the strike established. Russian strategic depth is not sanctuary. The assumption that distance protects critical infrastructure from precision strike is a legacy doctrine built around the range limits of previous weapons generations. Storm Shadow, SCALP, EG, ATACMS, and the next generation of Ukrainian-developed long-range strike platforms do not respect that assumption. They respect corridor geometry, radar coverage gaps, mission planning precision, and crew professionalism. Ukraine demonstrated all four in the Alabuga operation. Russia's response to the strike was telling. Official channels initially denied any significant damage. State media published imagery purporting to show the facility operating normally. But commercial satellite imagery is not subject to Russian state media control, and the thermal signatures, the structural collapse indicators, the changed vehicle movement patterns visible in post-strike satellite passes told a different story. The denial was not credible, and Russia's military planners knew it. In the weeks following the strike, according to OSINT monitoring of Russian military logistics communications, there were documented increases in air defense radar activity in the Tatarstan region. Additional radar systems were repositioned. Coverage handoff protocols between adjacent air defense districts were revised. The seam the Su-24M crew had threaded was being closed, with new overlapping coverage added to eliminate the geometric dead zone. Russia was learning. But learning costs time. And in the interval between the strike and the remediation, Ukrainian intelligence was already analyzing the adjusted coverage patterns, looking for the next seam. This is how modern warfare evolves. Not in dramatic single moments of total victory. In iterative cycles of strike, response, adaptation, and strike again. Ukraine doesn't have Russia's industrial depth. It doesn't have Russia's manpower reserves. What it has is the intelligence architecture, the engineering ingenuity, and the operational nerve to reach deep into Russian territory and hit targets that Russian planners believed were protected by geography alone. Real tactics. Real consequences. EastAlert. The answer to the quiz. The Alabuga facility was assessed at peak capacity of between 300 and 500 Geron 2 drones per month. That's answer B. The lower figure, 150 units, reflects earlier production phase estimates from before the facility reached operational capacity. The upper figure of 800 significantly overstates assessed throughput based on satellite imagery analysis of the facility's manufacturing floor area and component logistics patterns. 300 to 500 is the assessed peak production band, making this single facility the throughput bottleneck for Russia's entire drone swarm strategy against Ukrainian infrastructure. Destroying it, even temporarily, was not a tactical success. It was a strategic one. 3 questions before we close. Was the decision to use manned aircraft for the penetration profile the right choice, given the availability of surface-launched long-range systems? The argument for manned aircraft is mission profile flexibility. A human crew can respond to unexpected variables in ways an autonomous system cannot. The argument against is obvious. Crew risk over 1,400 kilometers of hostile airspace is extraordinary. Both positions are defensible, and the debate among military analysts continues. Could Russian air defense have detected and intercepted this strike with better coverage coordination between adjacent districts? Probably yes, if the seam between the Moscow and Volga-Ural air defense districts had been identified and closed before the operation. Russia's air defense is formidable in depth, but bureaucratic divisions between military district commands create exactly the kind of coverage gaps that sophisticated mission planners exploit. A unified command structure with integrated radar handoff protocols would have significantly reduced the penetration corridor. Russia has that problem. NATO identified it. Ukraine used it. What would you have done differently in the mission planning phase if the weather degradation of Storm Shadow's infrared terminal guidance had been worse than it was? The adjusted terminal dive angle Ukrainian planners used was a calculated risk. A different crew, a different weather picture, might have required aborting and rescheduling, extending the window during which Russian signals intelligence might have detected mission preparation activity. There is no clean answer. Operational decisions under uncertainty never have clean answers. Subscribe to EastAlert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The Alabuga Zone is rebuilding. The northeastern assembly cluster will eventually be repaired or replaced. Russia has the industrial resources and Iranian partnership depth to restore production, and Ukrainian military planners know this. But the Alabuga strike changed something that cannot be unbuilt: the assumption that deep Russian territory is safe from Ukrainian precision. That confidence is gone now. Every Russian industrial planner, every facility manager, every Iranian technical advisor working inside Russia's defense industrial base has to operate with that in the back of their mind. The drones that were not built during the production outage represent Ukrainian cities that kept their electricity. The precedent that was set represents a capability Russia cannot simply build more radar to eliminate. The northeastern manufacturing hall is quiet now. The secondary fires burned out long ago. But the structural collapse remains. A permanent reminder that in modern warfare, distance is not protection, depth is not sanctuary, and industrial confidence built on geographic assumptions is exactly the kind of confidence that gets destroyed from 1,400 kilometers away. Stay vigilant.